This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's. Yes, I feared a lot that the end result, the fact that I lost my mum when I was 12 years old, could easily happen again to my wife.
The battle surrounding Prince Harry has taken a dramatic new turn as growing DNA demand places Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell directly in the spotlight. What began as a controversial debate has evolved into a highly charged confrontation, with questions, accusations, and competing narratives fueling intense public discussion. Supporters argue the claims deserve scrutiny, while critics insist the controversy has gone far too far. As speculation spreads and tensions rise, many are wondering whether this escalating clash could trigger an even bigger royal fallout. So, is Harry preparing to fight back against his loudest critics? Are Tom Bower and Lady C raising legitimate questions? Or has this controversy crossed the line? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
And she goes on to Sky TV and denounces Harry as a racist and a bully.
Prince Harry and Meghan have hit back at controversial biographer Tom Bower over his new book, which says Prince Harry was brainwashed by his wife.
Questions nobody can quietly ignore. Few royal controversies have managed to grow as quickly or as unexpectedly as this one. What began as scattered online discussions suddenly pushed its way into mainstream royal commentary, drawing attention from audiences across Britain, the United States, and far beyond. At the center of the storm were renewed calls for DNA verification connected to long-running debates surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's children. For years, similar conversations had appeared in niche corners of the internet before fading away. This time, however, something felt different. The discussion was no longer being driven solely by anonymous social media users. It was being amplified by two of the most recognizable critics of the Sussexes, Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell. Their involvement immediately changed the scale of the debate. Both figures had spent years publicly examining decisions made by Harry and Meghan, often challenging the couple's version of events and questioning narratives accepted by many in the media. As their comments gained traction, the controversy expanded beyond routine royal gossip and entered a far more serious territory. Supporters of Harry viewed the growing demands as intrusive and unfair. Critics argued that legitimate questions were being raised and deserved answers. Between those opposing viewpoints stood an increasingly divided public. The timing only added to the tension. Tom Bower's latest work had already reignited intense discussions surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, while Lady Colin Campbell continued revisiting issues she had raised for years. Together, they became central figures in a controversy that refused to disappear. Interviews, commentary programs, social media discussions, and online forums repeatedly returned to the same subject. Every new debate seemed to generate another wave of interest, drawing in people who previously paid little attention to royal affairs. For Prince Harry, the situation presented a familiar but uncomfortable challenge. Throughout recent years, he had repeatedly spoken about media intrusion, misinformation, and what he viewed as unfair treatment directed toward his family. Yet despite those efforts, questions he likely believed had been left behind were resurfacing with new intensity. The more attention the controversy received, the harder it became to dismiss as background noise. What had once been isolated speculation was now being discussed openly by commentators with established public profiles and large audiences. At the heart of the conflict sat a deeper issue. Some observers argued that matters connected to royal succession naturally invite public scrutiny. Others insisted that family and medical matters should remain private regardless of public curiosity. Neither side appeared willing to back down. As the debate grew louder, the focus increasingly shifted away from the original claims and toward the confrontation itself. Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell continued speaking. Their critics continued pushing back, and Prince Harry found himself facing a controversy that seemed to gain momentum every time it was challenged. Rather than fading away, The questions were becoming larger, more visible, and impossible to ignore. But the demand was only the beginning. What suddenly convinced so many people to revisit a question long thought settled? Who stood to gain from keeping the controversy alive? And as tensions escalated behind closed doors, what move was about to trigger Harry's strongest response yet? Let's unravel the mystery. Pressure mounts behind palace walls. As the controversy continued spreading across royal commentary circles, attention began shifting toward a different question. The focus was no longer only on the claims being discussed. Increasingly, observers were asking how Prince Harry was reacting to seeing the debate grow larger despite years of efforts to challenge criticism and defend his family's reputation. For Harry, the situation carried a familiar feeling. Throughout much of his adult life, he had publicly expressed frustration with media coverage, arguing that inaccurate reporting, speculation, and relentless scrutiny had caused significant damage both personally and professionally. Yet this latest wave of controversy appeared to present a challenge unlike many that had come before. The Duke of Sussex had never been reluctant to push back when he believed reporting crossed a line. Over the years, he launched multiple legal battles against major newspaper groups, accusing sections of the press of unlawful information gathering, invasions of privacy, and the spread of misleading stories. Those court fights became a central part of his public mission. Supporters viewed them as a necessary stand against powerful media organizations. Critics argued they reflected a broader attempt to control narratives surrounding his life. Regardless of perspective, one fact remained clear. Harry had repeatedly shown a willingness to confront criticism directly when he believed it threatened his family. That history is what made the current situation especially notable. The debate involving Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell continued gaining attention despite years of efforts by Harry and Meghan to reshape public perceptions. Instead of fading away, old questions resurfaced with renewed energy. Discussions that once existed primarily in isolated online communities began reaching wider audiences. Commentators revisited previous interviews, public statements, and long-standing disagreements, creating an environment where past controversies appeared impossible to leave behind. Some observers interpreted Harry's reported frustration as understandable. From that perspective, he was watching familiar accusations return after years spent building a new life outside the royal institution. Others viewed the situation differently. Critics argued that public figures, particularly those connected to the monarchy, inevitably face ongoing scrutiny. In their view, continued public discussion was simply a consequence of unresolved questions that had never completely disappeared. The divide between those interpretations only deepened the controversy. Meanwhile, Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell remained highly visible participants in the debate. Their continued commentary ensured the discussion stayed active across television appearances, interviews, social media platforms, and online forums. Every new mention seemed to generate another cycle of analysis and reaction. The more attention the issue received, the harder it became for anyone involved to ignore. For Harry, that may have been the most frustrating aspect of all. This was not a single headline that could be challenged and forgotten. It was an ongoing conversation fueled by competing narratives, deeply divided opinions, and growing public curiosity. Whether viewed as legitimate scrutiny or unfair speculation, the debate showed no sign of slowing. Instead, it was becoming increasingly personal, transforming a public controversy into a broader struggle over reputation, credibility, and control of the story itself. The deeper the discussion spread, the higher the emotional and public stakes appeared to become. And as Harry's anger reportedly intensified, unsettling questions began surfacing. Was this controversy exposing something far deeper than criticism alone? Who stood to gain from old accusations returning now? And what unexpected development was about to push an already fragile situation even further? Let's find out. The author who refused to back down. As pressure continued to build, attention increasingly settled on one man who showed little sign of stepping away from the debate. Tom Bauer was no longer being discussed merely as a commentator observing events from the sidelines. Instead, he had become one of the most influential voices shaping the conversation itself. While critics expected the controversy to fade with time, Bauer's involvement ensured that questions surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle remained firmly in the public spotlight. The more the discussion expanded, the more his name became attached to it. Much of that influence stemmed from the release of his book, Betrayal. The publication arrived at a moment when public interest in the Duke and Duchess of Sussex was already intense. Rather than offering a brief overview, Bauer presented a detailed examination of the couple's public journey, their decisions, their relationships, and the controversies that had followed them. The book immediately attracted significant attention, generating headlines, interviews, and countless debates among royal watchers. Supporters of the Sussexes viewed it as another attack on Harry and Meghan. Critics saw it as an investigation that asked difficult questions many others were unwilling to raise. Bauer's reputation played a major role in how the book was received. Long before writing about Harry and Meghan, he had built a career as an investigative biographer known for researching powerful public figures. His previous work focused on politicians, business leaders, and celebrities, often drawing attention for its detailed sourcing and critical tone. Because of that history, many readers approached Betrayal believing it carried a level of seriousness beyond ordinary royal gossip. To them, Bauer was not simply expressing personal opinions. He was presenting findings developed through extensive research and interviews. Yet that same reputation also made him a target. Critics argued that his work relied heavily on controversial claims and interpretations that fueled public suspicion. Some questioned whether his investigations contributed to understanding complex issues or simply intensified existing divisions. Others accused him of helping keep damaging narratives alive long after they might otherwise have disappeared. Those disagreements became part of the larger story, transforming debates about Harry and Meghan into debates about Bauer himself. What made the situation particularly significant was Bauer's refusal to retreat from the spotlight. Despite criticism from supporters of the Sussexes, he continued discussing his findings publicly. Interviews, television appearances, and media coverage kept his arguments circulating. Each appearance seemed to renew interest in the issues he had raised. Rather than softening his position, he appeared increasingly determined to defend his work and the questions it generated. To his supporters, that persistence demonstrated confidence in his research. To his critics, it suggested a willingness to keep controversy alive regardless of the consequences. Both interpretations gained traction, and neither side appeared willing to concede ground. As a result, Bauer evolved into something more than an author. He became a central figure in a growing confrontation that stretched far beyond the pages of a book. With every new debate, his role expanded, turning him into one of the most powerful and controversial forces shaping the larger battle over narrative, credibility, and public perception. Yet the deeper Bauer pushed, the more unsettling the questions became. Was he uncovering facts others feared to confront, or stepping into dangerous territory? Who stood to lose most if his claims gained traction? And why were tensions about to escalate far beyond expectations? Keep watching. Questions that refuse to fade. As Tom Bauer's arguments continued attracting attention, another powerful voice pushed the controversy even further into the spotlight. Lady Colin Campbell, widely known as Lady C, had spent years commenting on royal affairs, but this debate appeared to occupy a particularly important place in her public commentary. Rather than stepping back as criticism intensified, she continued revisiting issues that she believed deserved closer examination. Her remarks helped transform an already heated discussion into something much broader, drawing attention not only to specific claims, but also to larger questions about transparency, succession, and public accountability. Lady C's approach often centered on official statements and public records. She repeatedly examined birth announcements, public wording, timelines, and details that she argued warranted further scrutiny. Rather than focusing on a single issue, she presented a collection of separate questions that, in her view, formed part of a larger picture. Supporters believed she was highlighting matters that others were reluctant to discuss openly. Critics argued she was encouraging speculation by attaching significance to details that could have ordinary explanations. The disagreement over her interpretation became almost as controversial as the questions themselves. What made her involvement especially significant was her emphasis on constitutional implications. Lady C frequently argued that discussions surrounding members of the royal family could not be viewed solely as private matters. In her view, issues connected to the line of succession carried a level of public interest that extended beyond ordinary celebrity coverage. That argument became a central theme of her commentary. She maintained that questions affecting succession naturally attracted attention because the monarchy operates within a constitutional framework rather than as a purely private institution. Supporters of that position pointed out that succession has long been governed by legal rules and public procedures. From their perspective, public curiosity about such matters was not unusual. Critics strongly disagreed. They argued that personal and family matters should remain private regardless of royal status, and warned that excessive scrutiny risked crossing important boundaries. The clash between those viewpoints became one of the defining features of the wider debate. Media coverage amplified the controversy even further. Interviews, online discussions, and commentary programs repeatedly highlighted Lady C's observations, ensuring that her claims reached audiences far beyond traditional royal watchers. Every appearance seemed to generate fresh reactions. Some praised her willingness to address difficult subjects directly. Others accused her of keeping controversial narratives alive long after they should have faded. Either way, her influence on the conversation became increasingly difficult to ignore. As attention grew, so did the stakes. What began as discussion about specific details gradually evolved into a broader argument about public interest, constitutional responsibility, and the limits of privacy. Lady C's critics questioned her conclusions, while her supporters viewed her persistence as evidence of conviction. The more debate surrounded her commentary, the more central she became to the unfolding story. By this stage, the controversy was no longer defined by a single voice. Tom Bower remained a major figure, but Lady C had emerged as an equally influential force. Together, they ensured the discussion remained active, controversial, and impossible to dismiss. Their combined presence expanded the conflict far beyond its original scope, setting the stage for an even larger confrontation over narrative, accountability, and the questions that neither side appeared willing to leave unanswered. As Lady C's claims spread, new questions began to surface. Was she uncovering overlooked details or opening a far bigger constitutional debate? Why were her remarks triggering such intense reactions? Most importantly, who would respond next as the controversy moved into even more dangerous territory? Stay with us. Silence that fueled endless questions. As the controversy continued expanding across royal commentary circles, a surprising development began attracting almost as much attention as the original claims themselves. It was not a new statement, a legal filing, or a public confrontation. Instead, it was the absence of one. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle did not publicly address the growing DNA-related demands being discussed by critics, commentators, and online communities. Over time, that silence became a story of its own, creating a new layer of intrigue that deepened an already divisive debate. For many observers, the situation felt unusual. Harry had spent years speaking openly about media scrutiny and misinformation. He had challenged newspaper groups in court, publicly criticized reporting he believed was inaccurate, and consistently defended his family's right to privacy. Because of that history, some critics expected a direct response once the latest controversy gained momentum. When no clear public answer emerged, questions quickly followed. Why remain silent? Was the issue being deliberately ignored, or was there another reason behind the decision not to engage? Those questions soon became central to the wider discussion. Critics argued that the lack of a direct response carried significance. In their view, silence allowed speculation to continue growing unchecked. Some claimed that addressing the issue directly could have reduced public curiosity and prevented the debate from spreading further. As days turned into weeks and the discussion remained active, those voices became increasingly confident in their interpretation. To them, the absence of a response became part of the controversy itself. Supporters of Harry and Meghan saw the situation very differently. They argued that the couple had no obligation to answer every claim, theory, or accusation that circulated online. From their perspective, privacy remained a fundamental right regardless of public interest. They maintained that responding to speculative demands would only encourage more intrusive questions in the future. To many supporters, refusing to engage was not suspicious. It was a reasonable decision designed to protect personal and family boundaries. The clash between those viewpoints gradually shifted the focus of the debate. Discussions that once centered on specific claims now increasingly revolved around interpretation. Observers were no longer arguing only about evidence or allegations. They were arguing about what silence meant. One side viewed it as meaningful, the other viewed it as irrelevant. Neither perspective gained universal acceptance, and that uncertainty only fueled greater interest. Media coverage amplified the situation further. Commentators repeatedly returned to the same question, analyzing what had not been said rather than what had. Television discussions, online videos, and social media debates continued revisiting the issue from every possible angle. Each new conversation seemed to create fresh speculation, ensuring the controversy remained firmly in public view. As public curiosity intensified, the silence acquired a growing symbolic weight. Whether interpreted as restraint, strategy, privacy protection, or something else entirely depended largely on the observer. Yet the result was unmistakable. The absence of a response had become a powerful force shaping the narrative. In a controversy already driven by competing interpretations, unanswered questions were proving just as influential as any statement ever could be, ensuring the larger conflict continued moving forward with no clear end in sight. While silence grows louder around Harry, critics read meaning into every absence of words. Is this strategic control or quiet defiance? And if no statement ever arrives, who decides what the silence really means? And how far can interpretation go from this moment forward? Stay glued. Control of the royal narrative. As the controversy continued expanding, the conflict evolved into something much larger than a debate over specific claims. What emerged was a struggle over perception, influence, and the power to shape public understanding. On one side stood Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, who had spent years attempting to tell their own story through interviews, documentaries, public appearances, and personal projects. On the other side were figures such as Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell, whose commentary challenged many of the narratives the Sussexes had worked hard to establish. The battle was no longer only about questions being asked. It was becoming a contest over which version of events the public would ultimately believe. For Harry and Meghan, controlling their narrative had become an important part of life after stepping back from royal duties. They repeatedly spoke about correcting misinformation, sharing their experiences directly, and presenting perspectives they felt had been ignored or distorted. Through major media projects and public statements, they attempted to explain their decisions, their struggles, and their relationship with the royal institution. Supporters viewed these efforts as necessary acts of self-representation. Critics argued they were carefully managed attempts to shape public opinion. Yet every effort to establish one version of events appeared to meet an opposing interpretation. Tom Bower became one of the most prominent voices offering that alternative perspective. Through his research, interviews, and public appearances, he presented arguments that often conflicted sharply with the image Harry and Meghan projected. His supporters saw him as an investigator willing to examine uncomfortable questions. His critics accused him of reinforcing negative narratives that continued fueling controversy. Regardless of where opinions fell, his influence on the debate became increasingly difficult to dismiss. Alongside Bower stood Lady Colin Campbell, whose impact on royal audiences continued growing. Her commentary reached viewers who closely followed royal affairs and were eager for detailed analysis of unfolding events. Unlike casual observers, many of these audiences paid close attention to every statement, timeline, and public appearance. Lady C's ability to keep discussions alive ensured that debates surrounding Harry and Meghan remained active long after many expected them to fade. Her supporters praised her persistence. Her critics argued that her interpretations often encouraged further speculation. Even so, her voice remained one of the most influential in the conversation. As these competing narratives collided, public confusion deepened. Some people believed Harry and Meghan's explanations deserved trust because they came directly from the couple themselves. Others felt independent commentators were raising questions that should not be ignored. The result was a growing divide in public opinion, with each side viewing the same events through completely different lenses. The controversy gradually became less about proving specific points and more about determining credibility. Every interview, book, statement, and response was examined not only for what it said, but for what it suggested about the people behind it. Supporters and critics alike searched for evidence that confirmed their existing views, creating an environment where agreement became increasingly difficult. In many ways, this marked a turning point in the broader story. The conflict had moved beyond isolated controversies and evolved into a larger struggle over trust, influence, and public perception. As competing versions of reality continued battling for attention, the question was no longer simply what happened. It was who the public would choose to believe next. The struggle over truth intensifies as conflicting voices pull the story in opposite directions. Who is really shaping public perception? Is anything actually what it seems? And what hidden forces are still working behind the scenes? Stay with us. When the story outgrew everyone. What had started as a dispute driven by a handful of commentators was now becoming something far larger. The discussion surrounding Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, Tom Bower, and Lady Colin Campbell was no longer confined to books, interviews, or specialist royal programs. It had spread into a much wider public conversation, crossing borders, platforms, and audiences. With each passing week, the controversy appeared to gather fresh momentum, drawing attention from people who had never previously followed royal affairs closely. The debate had escaped its original boundaries, and that shift changed everything. Social media played a major role in accelerating the process. Clips from interviews, excerpts from commentary programs, and discussions about the controversy circulated rapidly across multiple platforms. A single statement could be shared thousands of times within hours, reaching audiences far beyond its original source. Supporters and critics alike contributed to the cycle, reposting content, offering interpretations, and debating the significance of every development. The speed of the conversation created an environment where interest rarely had a chance to fade before another wave of discussion arrived. As the debate expanded, international royal watchers began paying closer attention. In the United Kingdom, where questions surrounding the monarchy often carry constitutional significance, the controversy attracted strong opinions from both supporters and critics of the Sussexes. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan had established their post-royal life, audiences followed the story through a different lens, often focusing on issues of privacy, media treatment, and public accountability. Despite those differences, both sides of the Atlantic found themselves discussing many of the same questions. The growing attention created a new challenge. What had once been viewed as a niche dispute between a few public figures was becoming part of mainstream royal commentary. News articles, online discussions, podcasts, and video channels increasingly referenced the controversy, ensuring that it remained visible even to people who were not actively searching for information about it. Each new mention expanded the audience and introduced additional perspectives, making the debate more complex and harder to contain. The sheer volume of discussion began creating its own momentum. Some observers argued that public interest was proof the questions deserved continued examination. Others believed the controversy had grown beyond the facts themselves and was being sustained by endless speculation. The divide became sharper as more people joined the conversation. Every side believed it was defending a reasonable position, yet agreement seemed more distant than ever. Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell remained prominent voices, but the story was no longer dependent on either of them. The discussion had developed a life of its own. Thousands of commentators, content creators, and social media users were now participating, often interpreting the same information in completely different ways. That made controlling the narrative increasingly difficult for everyone involved. Now, the controversy had reached a point where no single person appeared capable of directing its course. Questions that once circulated among dedicated royal observers were now part of a much larger public conversation. Whether driven by concern, curiosity, skepticism, or loyalty, the attention continued growing. The conflict was no longer just about Harry, Bower, or Lady C. It had become a global debate whose momentum seemed increasingly difficult to slow and perhaps even harder to predict. How did a single controversy begin echoing across continents, drawing voices far beyond the palace walls? Who is truly steering the narrative now, and what happens when public opinion turns into something no one can control anymore? Stay tuned. Credibility hanging above royal storm. By this stage, the debate had moved beyond questions, commentary, and competing interpretations. Something far more significant was now at stake. The discussion increasingly centered on credibility, trust, and reputation. For Prince Harry, Tom Bower, and Lady Colin Campbell, the issue was no longer simply about what was being said. It was about how those statements could influence public perception for years to come. As the conflict expanded, each side faced growing pressure, and the consequences of every new development appeared increasingly difficult to ignore. For Harry, the challenge was especially personal. Since stepping away from royal duties, he had invested considerable effort into presenting his own account of events. Through interviews, documentaries, public appearances, and his memoir, he attempted to explain his experiences and defend decisions that had generated intense debate. Supporters believed he had shown courage by sharing his perspective openly. Critics questioned parts of his narrative and argued that public scrutiny was a natural consequence of such visibility. As the latest controversy continued spreading, concerns emerged about how it might affect the image he had worked so hard to build. The situation carried risks beyond immediate headlines. Public trust is often shaped over time, and once doubts enter a conversation, they can prove difficult to remove completely. Some observers believed Harry's reputation could suffer if critics continued framing unanswered questions as significant. Others argued that repeated controversies reflected more on those promoting the claims than on Harry himself. The disagreement highlighted a larger issue. Reputation is rarely determined by facts alone. It is often influenced by perception, interpretation, and the stories people choose to believe. At the same time, Tom Bower and Lady Colin Campbell faced challenges of their own. Their supporters viewed them as individuals willing to address topics that many others preferred to avoid. To those audiences, both figures had built credibility through persistence and a willingness to question established narratives. Yet critics saw a different picture. They accused Bower and Lady C of fueling controversy and keeping divisive subjects in the public eye. As scrutiny intensified, their own reputations became increasingly connected to the debate they helped shape. This dynamic created a situation in which every participant had something to lose. If the controversy faded without resolution, critics of Harry might argue that important questions remained unanswered. If the discussion continued growing, supporters of Harry could claim that speculation was being elevated beyond reasonable limits. Neither outcome offered a clear victory. Instead, the conflict appeared to trap all sides inside a cycle where each new reaction generated fresh disagreement. What made the situation particularly striking was the unwillingness of any major figure to retreat. Harry remained committed to defending his family's privacy and reputation. Bauer continued standing behind his work and public commentary. Lady Colin Campbell showed little sign of abandoning arguments she had raised repeatedly over the years. Their persistence ensured the debate remained active, even as criticism intensified. The conflict was no longer defined solely by specific claims or public reactions. It had become a broader struggle over trust, authority, and long-term credibility. With reputations increasingly tied to the outcome, every development carried greater weight, setting the stage for an even more consequential chapter in the unfolding story. With reputations now hanging in the balance, how far will this battle really go? And who stands to lose the most if the truth shifts again? What happens when credibility itself becomes the battlefield? And can either side survive what comes next? A conflict without final answers. Despite months of discussion, analysis, criticism, and public debate, the central questions remain unresolved. Rather than moving toward a conclusion, the situation has entered a new phase. The dispute involving Prince Harry, Tom Bauer, and Lady Colin Campbell has drawn sustained attention, yet none of the sides appear closer to persuading the others. The divide has widened, leaving observers with sense the confrontation is ongoing. What makes the situation remarkable is its endurance under scrutiny. Most controversies fade, yet this one repeatedly resurfaces whenever new commentary, interviews, or online debates emerge. High-profile involvement keeps interest alive, while unresolved disagreements sustain momentum. For Prince Harry, the challenge is complex, involving privacy concerns and public scrutiny. Supporters argue he protects his family, while critics say public figures face unavoidable accountability. This tension remains central to the debate. Bauer and Lady Colin Campbell remain central figures, unwilling to retreat from positions they have publicly defended. Supporters see conviction, critics see persistence that prolongs controversy. Their continued involvement keeps attention focused on the dispute. Public curiosity has become self-sustaining. Online discussions, commentary, and revisited claims create a cycle where the story continues without major new developments. Each side seeks validation, reinforcing division. One key question remains: can any single statement from Harry reshape perception, or has opinion already hardened beyond influence? Some believe a decisive response could shift narratives. Others think the divide is now too entrenched for resolution. As the controversy progresses, it increasingly revolves around reputation, trust, privacy, accountability, and competing narratives. The stakes continue rising, and without resolution, the situation moves toward an unpredictable next stage. The story now extends beyond individual claims or personalities, evolving into a broader struggle over how public truth is formed and maintained in the modern media landscape. Each development feeds into an ongoing cycle of interpretation, where statements are dissected, amplified, and reinterpreted across platforms. The absence of resolution has itself become a defining feature, keeping audiences engaged even in moments of apparent silence. As speculation continues, the boundaries between fact, perception, and narrative control grow increasingly blurred, making it harder to determine where influence truly lies. With no clear endpoint in sight, the situation appears set to continue shaping reputations and public trust in ways that remain unpredictable. Ultimately, the uncertainty itself ensures continued attention, as audiences remain drawn to a story that refuses to settle into any final agreed conclusion. So, what do you think? Has Prince Harry been unfairly targeted by relentless speculation, or are Tom Bower and Lady C justified in raising difficult questions? Share your thoughts in the comments, then like, share, and subscribe for more.